Alright, hello everyone, and thank you for tuning in once again to the Black Box Podcast. BBOR, Black Box Online Radio, coming to you from West Virginia. Today's another edition of Occult Mondays here on BBOR, and it's really just turned into Evil Mondays, because mostly we just discuss evil. We're still working on Dr. Michael Shermer's The Science of Good and Evil, and we're going to talk specifically about a presentation that he gave with the JREF, the James Randi Educational Foundation. I have to say, though, just on a personal note, James Randi is someone who, maybe not a personal hero for me, but someone whose work I've definitely admired, definitely in his ability to combat psychic fraud. So a lot of good emotion going out that way. Well, Dr. Michael Shermer is someone whom I've openly admitted that I am not a fan of, that I don't really like his work. However, the more you get to know someone, sometimes you learn that you aren't exactly that different after all. I mean, I heard his presentation with the JREF on the science of good and evil, and I'd really have to say it was a lot better than I had expected it to be, because it's like he comes close. He comes close to using psychology and human development to explain good and evil, but he even read one of his book reviews during the presentation where the reviewer was like, Michael Shermer comes close, but not quite. He doesn't quite get there. And I definitely have to agree. There are some very big things that I guess him and I have some sort of disagreement on, and let's discuss right now. The first thing, he begins by identifying these two things, saying there is no supernatural, only the natural. There is no paranormal, only the normal. Well, to that, I have to take some immediate exception. I've done an upload on this channel before talking about the true supernatural. Like, nothing can be above nature. Nature is just sort of the totality of all existing processes. And it is, I mean, it also includes things like the Big Bang and the cosmos. That stuff is also natural, is it not? Nature is the totality of all the existing processes. So if you say that something is supernatural, then you're saying that it's outside of that, i.e., it doesn't exist. So if you identify something as supernatural, you're making the assumption that it doesn't actually exist. And this was presented by Guy Lyon Playfair, who wrote a couple books about this in the 70s, but he became much more famous for discussing the case of the Enfield poltergeist later in his life. And he said something that was more eloquent than anything I could have ever put to words when he was like, it's not supernatural if it exists in the natural world. It's just misunderstood. I'll repeat that. It's not supernatural if it exists in the natural world. It's just misunderstood. So him and I kind of came to a very similar conclusion, which is something that I believe Michael Shermer is overlooking. So it's he's coming at this from sort of a slanted perspective, is what I'm saying. And furthermore, supernatural is just a flawed term to begin with. Secondly, no paranormal. Paranormal just means that it's outside the realm of normal science. It's just outside the realm of traditional science. One of the biggest examples of this is UFOs. Are they scientific or paranormal? Well, it comes down to things that are told through stories, personal sayings, passed down from person to person, and passed down through things like storytelling, folklore, textual information without supporting sources. This becomes paranormal. That's all it is. It just means that it's not supported by something in the realm of traditional science. Maybe you could say UFOs as an example, but things like dark matter and dark energy, those aren't proven. I mean, maybe not proven's the wrong word. Those are things we don't completely understand yet, right? But they are supported by traditional scientific means to get there. So those things are not paranormal. So, once again, I think Shermer is coming from a very slanted perspective to begin with. During the discussions on good and evil, he's a very big champion of the golden rule, do unto others as you would have them do unto you. And you can phrase this in a lot of other ways, such as treat other people the way you want to be treated. But one of the largest things that I've always had exception to with that is, you don't treat other people the way you want to be treated. It's like, when parents give their kids a spanking, they're like, well, if I were a kid, would I want a spanking? Or, say for a more extreme example, and more legitimate, if you are sitting on a jury and someone's about to be convicted of murder, do you think, what would I want if I were the person sitting in the defendant's chair? Do I want to be found guilty or not guilty? Do I want to face the death penalty or not? We don't live our lives by this golden rule. Do unto others as you would have them do unto you. Treat other people the way you want to be treated. It's like, this is something that is very, very general and said very, very much in the middle ground. And it does not go to the extremes. And you'll hear me say that a lot about Dr. Shermer. His thinking doesn't go to the extremes. And there are some major challenges that you could face. So it's like, I definitely think that the golden rule is not just something that people have built up upon to form the foundations and bedrock of civilization. No, I think there's something much larger to that when we just have discussions on what is good and what is evil. I mean, evil most definitely is not just ignoring the golden rule. Now, we have some other things that are going on here. Shermer equates morality with hunger and being horny, I kid thee not. So he's like, he's trying to say, can a dog be hungry? Yes. It's like, and can a dog be horny? Yes. But one of the things that he doesn't quite get is, other animals like dogs and cats, do they actually have morality? Do they actually have things like romance? Do they actually have things like mutual understandings and comprehensions of language? Not really, no. Morality is something that, as I understand, is exclusively human, or maybe it's found in something like whales or dolphins. I mean, I'm just guessing based on their brain structure. Don't quote me on that. That's a very, very, sentence that I'm not sure of. But it's like, no, I mean, equating with morality with sort of the sex drive and hunger, and just saying that these are things that we, feel, that's not exactly a good way to look at it, because once again, that type of feeling, morality as a feeling, is not found in any other animal. So it's like, it's not found in things like dogs and cats. So this is something completely different. This is something that is a higher sense of feeling that is not found in those other animals. So we're dealing with something very different here. That's what we can say. Now, some of the largest things that I wish that, I could have just been sitting there and just challenging him on would be, he introduces what is called provisional morality, when it's like, it's not quite perfect, but it works most of the time. And also, adding something into the golden rule, he says you should also ask first. Like, for example, treat other people the way you want to be treated. Well, if I see a girl and I like the shape of her butt, can I walk over and touch her butt? Yeah, that might sound silly, but I would want her to do that to me. Treat other people the way you want to be treated, right? Well, he puts up a counter to something like that when he says, yeah, treat other people the way you want to be treated, but you ask first. If you want to touch a girl's butt, you have to say, hi, can I put my hand on your buttocks? I mean, yeah. But, that might sound like a silly example, but for this stuff to work, in terms of the science of good and evil, it has to go across all possible scenarios and all ends of the spectrum. Otherwise, we aren't talking about good and evil. We're talking about something completely different. It's just like, but one of the big things is, it's just like, this whole ask first rule, do unto others as you would have them do unto you, and ask first, ask permission before you invade someone's personal space. It's like, is this really what the foundations of society are? Is this really what good and evil is? I mean, it's like, it almost sounds like he's taking a sort of fraction of good and evil and trying to explain that through human psychology, as opposed to the whole thing. Because the challenges are, what do you do with something like rape? Is that provisional? Is that ever justifiable? Should that ever happen? Can anyone ever just say that rape is a good thing, or that rape is welcome? Because you might be thinking, well, he explains that all very clearly. It's just, the the invasion of personal space and the violation of somebody else. But if it's always wrong, always, then this isn't something that is provisional. This actually goes to a moral absolute. This is something that is absolutely bad. Here we get to evil. And, okay, what about September 11th, the mass murder of 3,500 people? I mean, it's like, I do mean murder. We're not talking about killing, but murder. So it's like, these things here, what is provisional about that? It seems like a lot of the things that Dr. Shermer is talking about really support the middle ground position. They sort of really explain how we can solve things in our daily life, about cooperation and about, not being rude, and about how the society can function if we are just kind of more cooperative and social. But what do we do with these extreme statements, like we mentioned, the things like rape and 9/11, or the Holocaust, or torturing children? If these things should never happen and they're always unacceptable, then that does push it to a level of moral absolutism that he hasn't identified yet. And then that is sort of the largest thing that is lacking from his presentation. What does that have to do with the development of humanity? Always is always. If it's always wrong, then it's always wrong. That's the end of that. And that becomes something that is evil, that was not created by any human being. It's just evil. And once humans start to say that, the origin of goodness is in the human brain and the origin of evil is in the human brain, it's more just like, once you sort of go to that level, then you're giving human beings the ability to manipulate the system, to try and say that, I can argue my case that, no, it is not evil. Or I can argue my case that, no, it is not good. And it's like, that's not necessarily how we live our lives. And that's not necessarily even something that is acceptable. I mean, there's nothing wrong with saying that rape is bad all the time. Even back to the early humanoids, back to the cave dwellers, back to the Stone Age. You could say rape is bad. I don't think there's anything wrong with that. And it does achieve a certain level of moral absolutism. Now, there are some other things that we have going on in here. He mentions, like, what is justice? And justice is just a man-made social construct. What is liberty? Liberty is the freedom to pursue happiness. I'm sort of completely in following those things, but we sort of talked about how, once again, if you violate someone's freedom to pursue happiness, you violate their liberty, and if you say that that is always wrong, then, okay, you're at the moral absolute. We talked about that. And he actually talked about how religion is not necessarily a bad thing, but, it's like, religion prevents us from doing what we want. And, I don't necessarily think that that is correct either. It's almost more like, the ambition is not to prevent people from desire, or for exerting their desires in the world. It's to prevent people from destruction. Because one of the things that I thought was rather interesting about Shermer is he concluded his presentation with a statement that, I am free from God, but not the God of nature. I will leave you guys with that. I am free from God, but not the God of nature. What do you think about that? And what do you think about the challenges that I've put forward to Michael Shermer's presentation on the science of good and evil? I guess you could sort of clearly heard me say that I think there are things that he has not identified as evil that are not provisional, that there actually is a definite system of what is good and bad and what is good and evil. Somebody was saying something rather interesting on a comment section once when they're like, if you drink battery acid, that destroys your body. Can't we say that that's bad for you? And I was like, no, you can say that drinking battery acid destroys your body. It destroys your internal organs. To say that something is bad, well, that requires sort of a different level of understanding. Alright, well, what do you guys have to say? If you have anything to say at all, drop a comment below. And also, if you haven't listened to the other part I did on the science of good and evil, please listen. Until next time.